Hello, this is the ninth lecture in the Business Ethics series. This week we're looking at various ethical controversies in the realm of business and how they impact on things like corporate reputation. So I'm going to present you with a series of real scenarios. All of these ethical dilemmas have actually happened. They're real businesses and real people. And if we were meeting normally in the classroom, I'd be asking you as a class what you would do if you were in the shoes of the various people we're going to look at. So I can't do that quite as straightforwardly now that we're in lockdown, but I can set up a chat room facility on Brightspace should you wish to bounce ideas around each other and ask me questions or whatever else, so we can have some kind of engagement there. I'll suggest a time to set up the chat facility, and if it's not convenient for the majority of you, we'll renegotiate a different time, but we'll get some feedback going that way. So we're going to start with Martin Shkreli, who we have mentioned previously, but that was right at the start of the module, so you may possibly have forgotten who he was by now. So a bit of a reminder first off. Shkreli was the CEO of a company called Turing Pharmaceuticals. Very, very wealthy man in his own right before it became a CEO, and he has effectively bought up the company from a previous owner and made quite a number of radical changes. One of which is the change that got the most publicity, the most bad press, was that a particular medication that was made by that company and had been made previously to him buying it out and becoming CEO, so made under the previous CEO, called Daraprim, that is, the medication was called Daraprim, not the previous CEO, was manufactured and retailed at a fairly low price, $13.50. So not a great deal of money per tablet. I say not a great deal of money. I'm sure if you were strapped for cash it would feel like a lot of money, but nonetheless a comparatively small sum of money per tablet. Daraprim, as you can see there on the screen, is used to treat toxoplasmosis that affects pregnant women, people with HIV, various other immune system problems. And so for a lot of people it can be the difference between life and death. So Shkreli hiked the price from $13.50 a pill to $750 per pill. And that is one hell of a big leap, as I'm sure you'll appreciate. And given that the American medical system is one of personal insurance, that is to say you take out insurance with your company, and when the bill arrives for your medication, it is the insurance company that will pay the bill, or at least that's the theory, but that insurance isn't limitless. So there comes a point beyond which your insurance will not go, and that depends on how much insurance you had in the first place, how much you were paying in per month, so on. So somebody on a relatively straitened means, who might have a very basic form of health insurance, would at 750 quid a pill very rapidly run out of insurance cover, and it would reach the point where the insurance company would turn around and say, well, we've paid for as much medication as you're going to get from us. If you require any more, in effect, buy it yourself. And if you put that in terms, a couple of you in the class are American, so you'll fully appreciate the finances here. But for the rest of the class who are not American, put it in British terms, imagine you had to find £750 for one pill, and you are likely to be needing medication for a stretch of time. So it's not as if you take one pill and that's the lot, you never need another pill again. You're going to have to find 750 quid on a regular basis. Even if you were in a very well-paying job, you would pretty soon run out of savings, you would run out of income quite rapidly at that sort of a price. And so Shkreli was accused in the press, because there was a huge hoo-ha in the newspapers and TV stations and what have you, was accused of effectively price gouging, of taking a bunch of people who really needed this medication because their lives would be at risk without it, and then bleeding them dry. And he was being interviewed by newspapers, being interviewed by TV stations in America, and at one stage was also brought before a Senate committee of American politicians who sat there and grilled him over his decision-making processes. Now, I can't play the YouTube clip there in this podcast because it disrupts the whole podcast and causes the system to keel over in a heap. So I'll put the link up for you on Brightspace. You can go into the PowerPoint and listen to that link. It's just a news report about the situation, and you see Shkreli being interviewed and get a sense of the kind of person he is. The whole situation probably was not helped by the very kind of person Shkreli is. He has that sort of smarmy, smug, self-satisfied attitude about him, and one of those faces that people would very rarely grow tired of punching, that just sort of puts backs up. And he certainly put up the backs of the Senate committee, because his approach to them was essentially, it was his company, he was behaving completely legally, there was absolutely no law against what he was doing, therefore it was entirely down to him what price he charged, and in effect the Senate committee could go and do one, as it were, to put it politely. And a further response in one of the ongoing meetings with the Senate and various politicians was that the problem, he said, did not reside with him, it resided with them, with the lawmakers in America. That if they objected to such massive price hikes, then the responsibility, the burden, was on them to pass laws against it. In other words, he was obeying the law, and he would continue to obey the law in future. So if that law changed and said you can only hike a price by so-and-so amount, then he would obey that law accordingly. Therefore, the problem wasn't with him as a businessman. It was with politicians for failing to tackle laws in a sensible fashion, failing to address these problems. If you don't like it, you, the politicians, do something about it. Don't expect business people to do something about it. Is that a fair point? Does he have a valid point to make there? And whether we're talking about the American Senate or, let's say, a British equivalent, somebody like Shkreli, who could make the same decision in this country and face themselves being grilled by some kind of private committee within British Parliament by British politicians, no matter what the nationality is, does the burden here fall upon government rather than upon business to regulate the scale of price hikes? And does that go across the board for any kind of article being sold, or only specific articles? So in other words, if I own a company that manufactures shirts, luxury fancy shirts, and I want to go and hike the price of one of my shirts from 25 quid a shirt to £500 a shirt, for argument's sake, is that entirely down to me as a retailer to do that, as a manufacturer? If I want to do it, then I'll do it. Or should the government be stepping in to say, I can only hike the price of a shirt by a certain amount? Because clearly there's a difference between a shirt and life-saving medication. People can live without shirts. If people who used to like my 25 quid shirts are now priced out of being customers because I've hiked the price by such an enormous amount, well, they're not going to die for lack of a shirt, are they? Let's face it. Nothing terrible is going to befall them because they have to go and buy a different brand of shirt from a cheaper company. However, people requiring life-saving medication might not have the luxury of a cheaper company elsewhere offering that same medication, because their tendency to patent medications and keep ownership of medications to prevent other rival companies from doing cheaper products and versions of the same thing. They might not have the benefit of going to a different company to buy that medication somewhere else for less expense. That could be the difference between them living and them dying. So does it depend, should government interfere in all forms of price hike, or only some forms of price hike, or in no price hikes at all? We've mentioned Ayn Rand quite a few times in the past. She would have been of the opinion, had she lived long enough to see this sort of situation develop, that government should not be interfering at all, and that if somebody like Shkreli hikes the price so high that people are dying because they can't afford the medication, well, that's horrible and unpleasant for those people who are dying and their families, but in the long run, Shkreli will run out of customers because nobody will be able to afford, or at least hardly anyone aside from millionaires and billionaires, hardly anyone will be able to afford his medication, so he won't be able to sell it. And what's the point of being in business manufacturing something so expensive that hardly anyone can afford it? The natural course of business would be that eventually either he would have to drop the price, or rival companies would make an even better form of medication to treat toxoplasmosis, and they would flog their medication at a much cheaper price, massively undercutting, and they would make the profits whilst he went without profits. But that, of course, is a long-term solution, and it doesn't address those poor people who are dying in the short term. But then that's not an issue that Ayn Rand was particularly given to thinking about very much, the short-term impact. She was more of a long-term planner and thinker, if we can put it like that. Other companies have done the same, and Shkreli certainly sat there with that face on him saying to the Senate committee that, well, it's not just me, is it? XYZ company have also done these sorts of things, and you didn't haul them before a Senate committee. Why me? Why not them as well? Why not make across-the-board decisions? So as an example of another company that did something not dissimilar, Valiant Pharmaceuticals International, they acquired a cardiac set of cardiac drugs, Isuprel and Nitropress, and raised the prices, one by 525% and the other by 212%. Again, those are hell of a big hikes. Shkreli's hike was much, much higher than that, but nonetheless, in both the case of Valiant and Shkreli, those decisions were completely legal. There is no law in America, there is no law in this country. I can't think off the top of my head of any country which does have laws that ban pharmaceutical companies from doubling, trebling, quadrupling, whatever level they want to go up on the price of their medications, any more than there are laws against car manufacturers or chocolate bar manufacturers from hiking their prices tenfold if they want to hike their prices tenfold. They can go up and up and up as much as they want to. There are no laws. It's a deontological approach. If we're bringing this back to ethics, you will instantaneously remember deontological approaches are effectively law-based ethics. That you obey the laws you are required to obey. You do what you are required to do by either the laws of government or the laws of God or whatever the situation may be, whoever's laws it happens to be. And what is right is defined by whoever it is that's making the laws and dispensing the laws. And equally, what is wrong is defined by whoever is making the laws. And if lawmakers do not specifically state that massive price hikes are illegal, whether or not they're immoral is a separate issue, but they're not illegal. Therefore, from a deontological perspective, it is not unethical to hike your price because the law allows you to do it. Part of this, we could argue, coming back to Thomas Hobbes at the bottom there, and his social contract theory. There's a social contract between a CEO and their employees, shareholders, other people with a vested interest in their company. What is that social contract? Well, regardless of whether we're talking chocolate bar making companies or car making companies or pharmaceutical companies or any other type of company, the bedrock function of a CEO is to ensure that their company makes a profit. Ideally, enough of a profit that they can go on paying all of their staff, they can pay their shareholders, They can pay the electric bill and the gas bill and any other bills they may have. They can pay their suppliers and perhaps have enough money left over that they can invest in future projects, buying new types of equipment that will improve the functioning of their company, or buying new factories, or buying new shops, or buying whatever it is that's relevant to that style of business. A CEO who barely makes a profit, or indeed makes a loss, whose company just scrapes an existence from one year to the next, is not likely to stay as CEO for very long, because that company will at best stagnate and at worst shrink and maybe have to start sacking staff, or drastically reducing the profits of their shareholders and investors, who are going to moan like blue murder if their money and their income goes down. It's going to have a knock-on effect on other people's income. Does the CEO, and here's a debate point for you, does the CEO of any given company have a social contract outside of their company? In other words, do they owe anything to their customer base, to the general public? Or is their allegiance solely to within the company? So if you've got the situation of Scraley or Valiant here, where they hike the price, they make more profits, the staff get maybe a pay rise, perhaps, I don't know if Scraley did give a pay rise, but let's say, for argument's sake, he could have done potentially with the extra income, or he could have invested that extra income in a variety of other ways that would be of benefit to his company. So they're all happy. Their social contract is being fulfilled, but clearly the customer is desperately struggling to buy the product, which they very much need and can't safely go without. Does the CEO, whether it's Scraley or any other CEO, do they have a social contract with their customers to ensure that the customers can afford the product, that it is retailed at a level that's within the financial range of the customer, whether that's, I say, buying clothing, or whether it's buying medication, or whatever it might be? Or is their commitment to the CEO entirely in-house rather than to anybody else outside? That's the man himself, Martin Scraley, and I dare say you might agree that a face like that is enough to put anyone's back up. Not the easiest person to get on with, but then I suppose he's not in the position he is in because he is a nice, jolly, amiable soul. People very rarely rise to the top of the business world because they're all cuddly. If you want to be successful and cuddly, then maybe become a children's TV presenter. Don't look to become a CEO of a multinational company. He is what he is. And should it particularly matter what he is? So whether he was a pleasant, amiable chap, or a smarmy, irritating, smug little tick, does it matter one way or the other when it comes to his behaviour and his actions? Does it change the ethical context of his actions? Arguably not. Ethics are nothing to do with likability. Or at least they shouldn't be to do with likability. They should be focused on the action rather than on the personality of the individual performing those actions. Michael Pearson, who had been the CEO of Valiant, was also asked to testify eventually at a committee, and to some extent said he regretted some of the decisions made during his tenure in the company, but then it's always easy to turn on crocodile tears and appear to regret something after the event that you've done it, and when you're no longer directly involved with the company as the CEO. So he claimed regret for being too acquisitive, too greedy. Scraley, totally unapologetic, and said, I could have raised it higher and made more profits for our shareholders, which is my primary duty. So again, that social contract, Thomas Hobbes' argument. Scraley saw his duty as making a ton of money for the company. That's what he did. And yes, he raised it to $750. I suppose when he was sat there listening to the politicians having a go at him and whacking their finger at him, he was probably thinking to himself, I wished I'd raised it to $950, and having less than remorseful views of his decision-making process. Is he right? Is that his primary duty? Shareholders in a company, people who invest money in the company, who want a return on the money they've invested, are not the only people with a stake. So we have to distinguish between shareholders and stakeholders. Stakeholders in any medical company are people who benefit in some shape, guise or form, and not only benefit financially as shareholders do, but benefit in other ways. So the suppliers, people who provide the raw materials used by that company, people who buy the product, the customers, but also organisations like hospitals and the governing bodies of hospitals who buy the products and distribute them to patients. They too have a stake to play. How else can we understand people's investments? Well, governments have an investment. Those governments, in the case of Britain, obviously because we have the NHS, governments will want the NHS to be able to get medications for cheap prices rather than to pay extortionate prices, or at least that's what a sensible government would want. So politicians indeed have a claim, an interest, a vested role. There are charitable organisations in America which help people who have little or no health insurance to get a basic level of healthcare, so they're not just left to die in a gutter. But those charities are comparatively few and far between. There are more hospitals requiring health insurance than hospitals willing to provide charitable aid in America. So both those hospitals who work with health insurance and those hospitals who engage in charitable works to some extent or another, both of those have an investment in the price of medications like Daraprim and so on. They have a role to play. How do we view the involvement of government, of hospitals, of insurance companies, of patients, the families of patients, the employers of patients? If you've got a member of staff who desperately needs Daraprim and they can't afford it, and they could be a very good member of staff, a very skilled member of staff, and they're getting sicker and sicker and sicker and maybe eventually having to leave work entirely or dying on the job because they can't afford the medication they desperately need, you too have an investment in wanting them to get their medication. So there's this whole raft of people that kind of like ripples on a pond that goes out and out and out, who have an interest and an investment in wanting certain products at least to be available. But then that's not necessarily only confined to medication. As an employer, you want your staff to be able to get to work if they're coming a distance. So you might have an investment in their access to transport. Now, whether that's transport in the sense of their own car or a bike or public transport, and making sure there's buses running and trains running and the ticket prices are affordable and all of that sort of thing, your staff need to get to work. You can't run a company if half your staff can't turn up because the buses never run on time, or the train fares are so extortionate they can't afford them, or the price of petrol has skyrocketed and the drivers can't get into work because of it. So it's not only medications that have an effect on the usefulness, if we can put it like that, of staff, their capacity to perform and engage in their jobs, it's other factors too. And so it's not only the people who directly use a substance, be that substance medication or petrol or access service rather than substance, access to public transport and a variety of other things we could sit here and think of, but all sorts of knock-on people who have an involvement in wanting to make sure that the country can afford to run, that individuals that they depend on and rely on are still dependable, still reliable, because they can access what they need to access in order to be dependable and reliable. So there's quite a wide array of stakeholders who all have a vested interest. Does this mean they should have a say? They should have some clout? Well, at one level, because we live in countries that are, well, claim to be democracies, we can debate how democratic they actually are, but they claim to be democracies. You could say, come the vote box, the ballot box, when we're all sitting there casting our votes for parties, one of the questions we could ask is, what are you doing, to the various political candidates? What are you doing about the price of so-and-so medication, about the price of petrol, about the efficiency of the buses, or whatever it may be that's of concern to us? So even if the people who run the pharmaceutical companies or petrol companies or whatever it happens to be, even if they're not remotely interested in your point of view, you can still engage indirectly with those companies via the medium of elected politicians by putting your vote towards someone who promises to address the issue, and address the issue deontologically, perhaps, by creating laws that require companies to behave in a way that would be ultimately of benefit to yourself, even if it's in a slightly indirect route. But that's very much the long game, the slow step-by-step process, and we all know perfectly well that just because a politician promises one thing at election time is no guarantee they'll do a damn thing about it once they get elected. So it can be a really, really, really slow game to go through election after election after election to find someone who finally will do what they promise to do, and the effect you want to have comes into place. Should we have more direct, more speedier routes of addressing stakeholder issues? If so, what would they be? We can debate that one at length. Shkreli's other argument is the one you got at the bottom of the screen about research costs. So not only has he obviously got to pay the gas bill, the electric bill, the phone bill, and the rest of it for his company, and staff costs, but pharmaceutical companies, more so than many other types of companies, have very, very heavy research costs. So if they want to develop a new medication to treat toxoplasmosis or cancer or heart disease or any other illness under the sun you care to think about, then that can require years and years and years of research before there is a pill or product of some description that can be sold. So before they see 1 penny of profit, it could be years and years and years, and throughout those years they've got to go on paying all of the scientists and the various people who are conducting research and experimentation. They've got to pay for the laboratories and all the very, very expensive and elaborate research equipment and the chemicals involved in creating drugs, and half the stuff they create might not work and has to be thrown in the bin and they start again from scratch, and that is phenomenally expensive. And at the end of it, they have a product, you hope, that works. Then they can start selling it. So let's say a company sells a pill and it costs £3 a pill. For the actual chemicals and the machinery and the staffing and the lorries to transport those pills out across to all the different chemist shops and what have you, that works out roughly £3 a pill. That's £3 a pill without a single bit of profit. Now the profit from that pill has not only got to reflect the wage packet of the people in factories boxing up the pills, putting the boxes on the back of lorries and the lorry drivers whizzing them across the country and all of that palaver, but it's also got to factor in the 10, 15, 20, however many years worth of research that went into just finding that pill in the first place, creating it. And that's just to break even. That's before we even think about how they're going to drum up enough money to start funding the research for the next pill, and the next pill, and the next pill. So people like Shkreli point out that pharmaceutical work, the research side of pharmaceuticals, is phenomenally expensive. You have to invest a ton of money before you see a single penny or a single cent in profit and turnaround. That money has got to come from somewhere. It's not going to fall out the sky from the magic pixies. Where is it going to come from? It's going to come from the amount of money, the price tag you slap on the medication, or slap on whatever kind of product it is you've created at the end of the day. Now, that doesn't, of course, mean necessarily that every single pill they sell is going to cost $750. But the reason medications tend to be so expensive is because they are reflecting not only the current costs of producing that pill, but all of the research costs that went into discovering that pill in the first place. One alternative that has been suggested by various people is that maybe governments should take on the funding of medical research and foot the bill through taxpayers' money. And then once they've got the discoveries, those discoveries could be sold off at suitable profit to reimburse the taxpayer to various private industries, private pharmaceutical companies. Would that be cheaper in the long run? Would it be more expensive? Difficult to say. But it's one option that has been mooted as a possibility. Now, putting aside pharmaceutical companies and people like Martin Shkreli, if we look at a slightly different issue, still staying in America as an example here, of how, not just how Americans do business, because this argument could apply to many other countries in a slightly different way, actually. It wouldn't be a direct comparison, but in a slightly different way. In the wake of one of the many, many school shootings that took place in America a couple of years ago, and America does have a depressingly high number of school shootings where usually one of the teenagers who's a student at the school, sometimes it's an ex-student, or just some random outside person, but usually it seems to be a current pupil, turns up at the school heavily armed with guns and knives and all manner of weapons, and goes around shooting other students, shooting the teachers, the caretakers, and anybody else they feel like shooting. Happens with alarming regularity. But in the wake of one of these, a group of the teenagers from one school got in contact with groups of teenagers from other schools that had had shootings in the past, and they started to align with one another, and they formed an organisation with the campaign title of #BoycottNRA, the National Rifle Association, which is the big pressure group, a lobbying group that's involved with gun manufacturing companies and anyone who is interested in guns and shooting and in favour of the American right to bear arms and so on. Very much pro that side of it. So the pressure group, campaign group, whatever you want to call it, decided that they would find out who the NRA did business with. So the NRA had a system, or still has a system as far as I know, where if you are a card-carrying member of the NRA, that entitles you to get discounts on purchases with a whole raft of different companies, and not just companies that retail guns, but all sorts of companies that you can, shops and what have you, can go into, and you can get discounts on car hire and discounts on plane tickets and discounts on all sorts of different things once you flash them your NRA membership card. So the campaign group, they contacted these various companies like Avis and Delta Airlines and so on, and said to them, if you continue to have this arrangement with the NRA, we will boycott you. And possibly, maybe at the start, these companies thought, well, so what if a bunch of teenagers boycott us? They're probably not our customers anyway. But then it wasn't just the teenagers, they started a big social media campaign, and then the newspapers and TV stations and what have you gave them a lot of publicity. And so lots of people who were not teenagers in these schools, but some of them parents, relatives, next door neighbours, and complete strangers who had no direct connection to those children, got on board and said, we also don't like the NRA, we feel that they are exerting too much pressure around gun laws, we want better gun control, the NRA uses their finances to influence politicians in Congress and the Senate to ensure gun laws are in their favour and not tightened up. So lots and lots of people get on board with this, and then these companies started to realise this wasn't just a few teenagers, this was a large number of people who were actively boycotting their company and telling them that they were boycotting their company. And therein is the key issue of any kind of campaign group. It's all well and good to boycott something, but if the company has no idea you're boycotting them, then it has no effect. They've got to know their sales are going down. You've got to tell them, I am not spending money with you because I don't like it when you do so-and-so thing. And if enough people write into them and say that, then it might start to have an impact on the decisions made by that company. And the CEOs and the boards, executive boards of the companies might start to think, well, actually, we've now had 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 emails in from people all telling us they're boycotting us for this reason. Maybe we need to do something to win their business back and change our policies. And some companies, not all of them, but some of the companies that had been involved in the NRA discount scheme backed out. And it did start to have a financial impact on the NRA. Not sufficient to achieve the long-term aims of the hashtag campaign group. That's still ongoing. As far as I know, it's still ongoing. And has yet to have the full effect that it aspires to have. But it did start to pressurise and have an impact. So some people did start to feel the pressure and consider how they did business, who they did business with, all of that sort of thing. So do boycotts work? Is consumer power, here is the ethical question, is consumer power effective? Now, whether it's to do with gun control or animal testing or the amount of sugar and salt in foods or any subject under the sun you care to imagine, have you ever boycotted a company because you didn't like their policies? Decided to yourself, right, I'm never shopping there again because of such and such a thing. Something we could perhaps discuss via the chat groups or whatever else. Have you never felt that motivated by anything to want to boycott someone? If you did boycott, did you let the company know? Did you write to them, phone them, email them and say, look, I don't like your policy about such and such, therefore I refuse to shop with you anymore? Did you get involved with some kind of charity or campaign group, got on board with that and participated in that, maybe signed a petition or whatever, to say that you are unhappy with the policies of a particular company? Do you feel it's effective? Have you seen companies changing their policies because of boycotts carried out by their customers, or former customers at any rate? Chris McDonald, as you can see there, is a business ethicist, and he says boycotts are full of passion, often good ideas, but they tend to have more of an impact on low-level employees than they do on CEOs or shareholders. So if the companies start to lose money, what are they likely to do? Well, they're more likely to start laying off their lowest paid staff than they are to cut back on the bonuses for the CEOs or the amount of cash handed over to the shareholders. So unless a boycott is so big scale that the company is about to nosedive into bankruptcy at any minute, by and large, the bankruptcies don't impact the people who make the decisions about the unpopular policies. They impact the people getting paid the least amount with the least amount of clout in the company, who have no say over the policies, who are just sort of cleaners or shelf stackers or factory operatives or whatever it is they may be, the ones that are being paid the least amount to do their jobs. They are the ones who will suffer in the short term. So McDonald says, whilst he appreciates the passion that fuels boycotts, he doesn't think boycotts are terribly effective, and that if customers want to exercise their consumer power, they need to do it in a very different way, so that they are more impacting the decision makers than they are impacting the people on minimum wage. within an organisation or company. Also, he highlights that kind of thing about people being yelled at and shouted at. So if you're having, I don't know, let's say animal rights groups targeting a food supplier that has a dodgy record around the treatment of animals, and they're going to start picketing, placard waving, shouting at employees going into work, who are they most likely to be shouting at? Well, they're probably, again, most likely to end up shouting at the lowest paid members of that company, the ones who have absolutely no say over anything that goes on in that company. They're very unlikely to see the CEO going into work or any of the shareholders turning up for board meetings. So they can go on making their decisions in blissful indifference to the earache that's being given to the people on minimum wage in their company. So if boycotts and shopfront protests don't work, what does? What does indeed? And there is something we could debate. If you've maybe tried other forms of protest aside from boycotts, it'd be interesting to hear if any of you have tried any other forms of protest, or if you think no form of protest actually works and therefore it's all a bit pointless. How do you approach issues where you feel a company is being very unethical? Do you simply not shop there, but at the same time accept that your decision is going to make no real difference to anything in terms of that company's future? Or do you take more active stances to try and change the way a company operates? If so, what stances do you feel actually work most effectively? Another argument made by McDonald is that if a company starts to suffer financially because so many people are boycotting it or disrupting the way it works through protests and placard waving and that sort of thing, again, who's likely to be harmed and suffer in this? Will it be the very wealthy at the top of the company making the decisions that the customers are unhappy with? Or would it be the ordinary employees, and not only the ordinary employees, but also the average customer, who again is probably not terribly well off, is probably on a fairly ordinary level of income, who just wants to go to that company and buy food or buy clothes or buy whatever it is that they want to buy. They are likely to, if that company starts shutting down shops because they're losing so much money, it's the shop workers that will get the sack. It is the customers, the ordinary everyday customers, who will not be able to buy their clothes or what have you at that company anymore because those shops are shut in their town. So it's impacting ordinary people, it's not impacting those who are directly involved in the decision-making protest. There are political ethicists, moving outside the realm of business, political ethicists who've made similar arguments around things like terrorism, for example. So if a terrorist group despises the decisions made by politicians and they go and plant a bomb on a bus, who's going to suffer from the bomb on the bus? Well, whatever, little old ladies and people going to work and what have you, who are sitting on the bus. And who goes to work on a bus? Well, mostly it's people who can't afford any fancier means of transport. So it's probably not going to be the politicians making the decisions that those terrorist groups object to. It's not going to be the rich, the powerful, the influential, who have lots of clout in society, because they'll be going to work in their Jaguars or whatever. They won't be going to work on the bus. So it's the people with the least amount of power, the least amount of influence, no involvement whatsoever with whatever big political decision-making actions the terrorist groups object to. They are the ones who suffer, not the people at the top, the people at the bottom. So again, do the people at the top much care what happens to people at the bottom? They may weep and wail in public when they're being interviewed by newspapers about how terrible and awful it is, but will it make a blind bit of difference to the decisions they make? A number of political ethicists, perhaps a little bit cynical, perhaps spot on the money, depending on your point of view, argue that those sorts of actions make no real difference to the decision making by the very, very powerful, because those sorts of actions don't have any real impact on those who have the power. They disrupt and destroy the lives of people at the bottom rung of society, not at the top rung. And so, whilst there's a world of difference between boycotting a company you don't like and putting a bomb because you dislike the decisions of politicians, nonetheless, in both cases, there is this sense of targeting the wrong people, not having an impact on those who do make the decisions, but having an impact on those who've got no involvement with the decisions at all. What could be done? Well, speculation. Does driving a wedge between the NRA and the companies that sponsor them, does that have an impact on the NRA? Well, financially it does to an extent. Does it send a signal out to politicians who are hand in glove with the NRA? Does it say to them, well, if we've driven these campaign groups, if they've driven a wedge between the NRA and their sponsors, they could potentially ... drive a wedge between the senators and congressmen and women and their sponsors, because so many politicians are taking donations and under the table backhanders and what have you in all sorts of different directions. So is there an implicit threat here that what works at one level could, if the campaigning groups step it up a bit, work at a more direct level with those involved in the actual decision-making processes? So the aim of the hashtag campaign group is to try and get to a point where those politicians who are very closely affiliated with the NRA would no longer find that a favourable position to be in. They might not be getting as much money or whatever. For every dollar they get from the NRA, they lose $2 from other companies that are and organisations that are pressurised into withdrawing their support. Maybe their popularity, their vote goes down perhaps, and is that going to make politicians more likely to make the decisions the hashtag group wants if they feel that there is no advantage to be had from making the decisions that the NRA wants? Will those politicians then change their decisions in order to win back votes from angry voters? But then for every hashtag vote they gain, they might lose a vote from someone who is pro the gun lobby, not just the NRA itself, but day-to-day voters. So how ultimately can a campaign group, whether it's to do with the gun lobby or any other subject under the sun, how ultimately can a campaign group win influence? And there have been plenty enough cases in the past in America and this country and every country under the sun where campaign groups have achieved the end they wanted by various different means. So it's not impossible to change the minds of politicians whatsoever. It can be done, but how is it most effective to do it? And is this down to consumer power rather than voting power? Is this about where you spend your money, what products you buy, what products you don't buy, as opposed to writing strong letters to the Daily Mail or buttonholing your local MP and saying, oh, I want you to vote this way, not that way? What actually changes the political process? Moving on from that to look at the issue of incompetence. Sally Krawcheck, back in 2009, so going back a few years now, was employed by Merrill Lynch, the big American bank. A lot of these case studies are American, I admit. That's just because they're well publicised rather than any particular wish to focus on American issues rather than any other country's issues. But she was employed to focus on Merrill Lynch's wealth management division, which is part of the Bank of America. So going back to what we were saying about the banking situation in last week's lecture, the split up between, you get overarching banks and they have subdivisions. Some deal with day-to-day banking and savings and wage packets and so on. Others deal with high-level investment for the super rich. So this was part of the wealth management division, not just for the super rich, it was also for the middle classes and people with relatively small amounts of money to invest who nonetheless wanted to invest them and make a decent return. One of the financial packages run by that management division was the Stable Value Fund. Now, the Stable Value Fund was popular with people who were not so much super rich with massive amounts of money to invest, but those with more modest amounts of money who nonetheless wanted a little bit of a return on the amount of money they had to invest. So it was, in other words, people who could less easily afford to stomach financial losses than those who had massive amounts of money who could ride out financial losses. Stable Value Fund, I mean, the name speaks for itself. The marketing there is you invest a modest amount of money in the Stable Value Fund and you get a modest return. So it's never going to turn you into a millionaire or a billionaire, but you'll get a modest return, which means maybe you can have a nice holiday next year, or a bit more money for your pension fund or whatever. It's sensible investments with sensible small scale returns. That's the marketing, or was the marketing strategy. But when she took over and she started, new broom sweeping clean, looking at the policies and what have you she was expected to manage, she very rapidly found out that the Stable Value Fund was nowhere near as stable as the advertising claimed it was. Previous employees, people who'd been in the job before her, who were no longer there, had made some really dodgy decisions, really poor, silly decisions, and we're going back to last week's lecture about the banking crisis, those sorts of crackers decisions that ultimately led to the banking crisis. And so what should have been a sensible low-risk investment was now likely to have a massive impact on the investments, and people who could not afford to lose money would start losing money very, very soon. Krojcik had to make a decision. Now, in her previous job, she'd been a high-ranking banker for Citigroup, and they had had a similar sort of problem at Citigroup of a badly managed fund, not badly managed by her, but badly managed by other people. And their customers had again faced the high risk of losing money through no fault of their own, but through the incompetence and greed and risky decisions made by other employees, aside from Krojcik. And her decision at that juncture had been, because the bad decisions had been made by employees of Citigroup, that the customers should not be losing out. So she made the decision to reinvest the money, refund money rather, so give money back to these small-scale investors so that they would not go financially belly up. And she got the sack for making that decision. So Citigroup, the people even higher up the organisation than she was, they effectively had presumably thought to themselves, well, screw them, customers, if they lose out, tough luck. We're not going to, we've got the money, we ain't going to give that back. It's our money now. But Krojcik decided to do what she felt was the ethical thing and not penalise the customers for the idiotic decisions made by the staff. Got the boot from there, ended up in Merrill Lynch faced with exactly the same situation again. She must have had one of those Groundhog Day moments and thought, here we go again. What should she have done? Should she have thought to herself, well, last time I got the boot, this time I'm going to make the opposite decision and let the customers suffer? Or should she have stuck to her ethical guns, no matter the risk to her own future employment, and said, nope, what's right is right. You can't shaft the customers because of the stupidity and incompetence of investment bankers. She went to the CEO. She said to him, look, I've been through all of this in Citigroup. It's happening all over again. What I did in Citigroup was the right thing to do. Yes, they sacked me, but it was still the right thing to do. And we should do the right thing again. Principles first, ethics first. Which is a nice example of a banker who does put ethics first and goes against the sort of popular perception that bankers have thrown their ethics to the wind, which arose in the light of the banking crisis. Did she lose a job? No. This time, the CEO of Merrill Lynch, unlike the CEO of Citigroup, said, actually, fair enough, I think you're dead right then, Ms. Krawcheck. We will go for what you've decided, and we'll put money back that would have been lost from these small-scale investors' savings, investments, and go with that. We will do the ethical thing. And so she stayed in her job. Those customers kept their money. They weren't screwed over. And hopefully Merrill Lynch started making different decisions and maybe looking very carefully at the kinds of people they were employing who had been making these really high-risk, silly, inadvisable decisions in the past. Would you have made the decision that Project made? Was she right? Or is it the case that any investment, whether it's a small-scale investment or a humongous investment, always carries with it risk? It's a form of gambling, like going on the stock exchange or putting your money on a horse. And so whether you're putting £5 on a horse or 50 grand on a horse, you always know there's the possibility that you might lose it. And therefore the advice is, if you can't afford to lose £5, don't invest. Don't place a £5 bet if you can't afford to lose the money. Likewise, if it's a 50 grand bet, if you can't afford to lose it, don't place it. So should the people putting their money into the stable value fund have been treated in the sense that, well, you knew it was a risk, the risk has gone wrong, tough luck? Or should they have said, no, stable value fund, the whole marketing strategy of this fund is that it is stable, small scale returns on small scale investments for people with a little bit of spare cash. And therefore, if you, as a customer, put your money into a stable investment, you have no reason to suppose that the bankers and executives are going to be making idiotic high-risk investments. And if they do, it's without your consent. Therefore, you should not be penalised for the stupid high-risk decisions that you never consented to in the first place. Is that the sort of situation we're dealing with? How do you, as students, visualise this situation? What would you do in Krawcheck's position? Ultimately, her decision paid off, but that doesn't mean you'd necessarily agree with it. Of course, you might have done the opposite. But it would be interesting, especially if you've ever been in a position where maybe you've been given the boot for doing something you felt was ethically right. Did that ever put you off of making the same kind of ethical decision again if you had suffered unpleasant consequences in the past for doing what you strongly felt was the right thing to do? It's very easy, this is a sort of a consequentialist argument to an extent. It's very easy to do the right thing if it doesn't cost you much to do the right thing. It's very difficult to do the right thing if you know, because of past experience, it could well cost you a lot and put yourself in a vulnerable position. So you're trying to do the right thing to protect other people, but you strongly suspect it's going to cost you your job or something at any rate, which will have a bad effect on your life. That's when ethics gets really difficult. Easy to be ethical. If you're a millionaire and you find a lost wallet, very easy to return the wallet because you're not strapped for cash. If you had £2.50 to your name and you find a lost wallet stuffed with the money, is it so easy, to be honest, and return the lost wallet to its owner? Or would you be tempted to say, well, hey, and pocket that money because you are so close to the financial edge that that money would make the difference between you eating that week and not eating that week? Very hard to make ethical decisions when you are on the edge yourself of losing a lot. So we're back to this issue. Is the aim of a manager like Krawcheck to maximise profits, no matter the impact on customers or staff or suppliers or whoever else it might be impacting? Or is it better to make a decision which would involve a short-term loss, giving them the money back that they would have lost because of those bad decisions by other employees, but in so doing keeping the long-term loyalty of their customers? Because obviously if they turn around to those customers and said, look, tough luck, we've lost the money, hard cheese, put up, shut up, they would have lost most, possibly even all, of those customers who would have said that you walked away from Merrill Lynch and said, we're never investing with you again because you're a nightmare. So is it what's the better financial decision? Keep long-term customer loyalty, even if it means a short-term loss, or retain your immediate profits, write off the customers, see the back of the customers, and focus on keeping the money you've got, not losing the money you've got? What's the better decision, short-term or long-term? Something to mull over and discuss. Another example, we've mentioned Nestlé a few times in the past because they seem to have an inordinately large amount of scandals associated with them. So we're finally moving away from American examples onto Nestlé, which, well, whilst it does have branches in America, has branches the whole world over. Back in 2015, Nestlé went public. They made an announcement to the newspapers and TV stations and what have you that they had discovered that some of the supply chains providing them, Nestlé own half the known world when it comes to food production. Walk into any supermarket, practically half, if not way more than half, of the goods on the shelves will track back to Nestlé as a company. So they manufacture so many things, it's nigh on impossible to work out what they don't manufacture these days. But for one set of food items that they were producing with suppliers in Thailand, they had discovered forced labour. Forced labour is weasel words for slavery, really. People being bullied, terrorised into working for a pittance with threats of violence if they try and leave the company and go elsewhere. Being exploited effectively, to all practical intents and purposes, enslaved. This was taking place in Thailand, and so they said, shock, horror, gasp, look at this, we didn't know until just now. We're going to release this information to the press, and along with it we will be cutting our deals with those particular suppliers in Thailand and moving to more ethical suppliers who don't abuse their staff, pay them a pittance, keep them in conditions of virtual slavery. And we're going to start paying much closer attention to our supply chains to find out what they're up to. And lots of people clapped and said, well done, Nestlé, this is the right thing to do, keep an eye on your supply chains. How very brave of you, how very brave of you to stand up and say this had happened rather than trying to sweep it under the carpet. Not long after, there was a scandal with the American branch of Nestlé, where it had been revealed that they were using child slave labour on the Ivory Coast with, I think in that case it was cocoa bean farming for chocolate. So having self-exposed one scandal in Thailand, they were at the same time sort of sweeping under the courts another scandal in the Ivory Coast with a different chain of suppliers. And this sort of flags up that when sometimes with these massive companies, when you think they're doing the right thing, they may not be. Or they may be doing it for ulterior reasons, a bit like sometimes these politicians or celebrities who, come out the closet and reveal that even though they're married to a woman, they're actually secretly gay 5 minutes before the newspapers reveal it. So in other words, are they doing it to be honest and forthright and stand up for gay rights and one thing and another, or are they just trying to get the jump on the newspapers shopping them? Sometimes you have to wonder why people make these self-disclosures, whether it's about their life as an individual or about the company they own or what have you. Is it always for as noble a reason as they claim it is? Or are they sometimes doing it to head off a scandal that's going to arise anyway? And they are perhaps quite happy to go on exploiting abusive labour in other branches of their company and look the other way and pretend they don't know what's happening. Maybe, perhaps. Who can say? The quote there from Andrew Wallace, who runs the Unseen UK charity, expresses this sort of jaded outlook. It's easy to own up to something that has already been uncovered. By the time Nestlé owned up to slavery in the Thai seafood industry, it was accepted knowledge. In other words, it was already leaking out. People were getting to know about it already. It'll be a brave new world when companies are actually doing the real investigation to probe into part of their supply chains that have remained outside the public domain, which is illustrated by the Ivory Coast situation. As information was leaking out about what was going on in Thailand, they suddenly went public about that and said, oh, how shocking, how awful, we're dealing with this now, whilst quite happily trying to keep hidden what was going on the Ivory Coast. And no doubt in many, many other parts of the world too. There might be all sorts of things going on that we don't currently know about that will one day hit the press. Who can say? So child there involved in the whole sort of slavery, that's cocoa production, cocoa beans, so forth. Obviously I can't play the YouTube clip there because it causes mayhem with the recording, but you can go into the uploaded PowerPoint and play the clip yourself. It just deals with some of these issues around chocolate production and so on, worker exploitation and child labour in other parts of the world. Obviously worth bearing in mind, it's only 100 or so years, just over 100 years, maybe 120 years, since child labour was a very commonplace phenomenon in this country. It's easy to look down our nose at foreign countries to say, oh look, they have child labour, and overlook the fact that we, up until very recently, had it ourselves, and arguably still profit from it. If we're buying clothes or chocolate or whatever it is that we're buying from countries that still have child labour, are we just effectively condoning it every time we buy from those companies that do still have 6-year-olds and so on toiling away for 10, 12, however many hours a day? So Judge Stephen Wilson threw that case out in 2017, stating that companies would stop trying to stop abuses if they thought they might be held financially responsible for them. So should companies, so this is effectively the judge found in favour of Nestlé, should companies be made to pay a fine if they are seen to be complicit or failing to take strident measures to deal with their suppliers? So this is not saying the company itself is employing 6-year-old child labourers, rather that they're buying their raw materials off some farmer or whoever it happens to be, and it is that person who is employing child labour or paying slave wages or doing what have you. So in any company, you're normally going to have suppliers. This may affect some of the companies you work for. At the moment, you probably have suppliers. How responsible is the head of your business, your ultimate employer, for the moral standards of your suppliers? If it turns out that some of those suppliers are engaged in slave labour and child labour and that sort of thing, should your company immediately stop trading with them? If they don't immediately stop trading with them, should your company be financially penalised? Should your CEO be dragged into court and made to pay a massive fine for, in effect, continuing to do business with a highly corrupt farmer or corrupt factory or corrupt whatever it may be that's supplying the goods, supplying the raw materials? Is there a moral duty on every company that has suppliers to not just take the supplies, say thank you very much and pay the bill, but to turn up at those farms, those factories, those harbours if it's seafood, and check the conditions of the employees on the ships who are out catching the fish, or check the conditions of the people working on the farm, toiling in the fields, whatever it may be? Is there a duty on them to investigate? Or should somebody else be doing the investigation? Let's say a government. But if we're talking multinational situations, let's say a British company buying products from India for argument's sake, is the duty then on the British government to investigate or on the Indian government to investigate? Who takes on board the responsibility for the investigation? Is the judge there, Judge Wilson, correct to say that if companies felt they had to pay up a big big fine, they would immediately stop investigating because they wouldn't want to know? And if it can be said they didn't know, then how can you fine them for something they don't know about? Or is that decision just a wrong decision? How do we understand the decision-making processes that have gone on here? Okay, moving on to another company, we have Laurie Peterson. She worked for a big toy manufacturing company, which was quite an old-fashioned, traditional style of toy manufacturing company. Toys for boys and toys for girls, usually dollies for girls and trucks and plastic guns and what have you for boys, the usual sorts of things. After a few years of working for this company, Peterson wanted to branch out and start challenging gender stereotypes. She wanted to make different types of toys for girls and boys to get beyond the usual old-fashioned stereotypes that she saw as problematic. She went independent. She founded her own company called Build and Imagine Toys, and they now make things like chemistry sets and building blocks, kind of Lego type stuff, that sort of thing. Science toys, engineering toys, and they market them equally to boys and girls. So in terms of the marketing, that's both the covers on the boxes. Some of them have pictures of girls on, some have boys on, some have pictures of both on. And it's not just kind of pink boxes for girls and blue boxes for boys. It's going beyond all of that usual type of stuff to try and branch out to selling their goods to whoever wants to buy them and encouraging children of both sexes to want to play with those goods through TV adverts, newspaper adverts, the designs of the boxes the toys come in, that whole array of marketing. Now, the question here from an ethical point of view is not so much about who sells the most, the old-fashioned company that Peterson used to work for, or the new company that she founded, who's got the biggest turnover, etc. That's not the question. The question is it down to companies to engage in what might be termed social engineering, to try and change the market tastes, challenge, let's say, sexism or racism or homophobia or any other ism that you care to imagine? Should that be down to companies? It's an area we see, for example, with Gillette and its marketing campaign around their razor blades, who released last year a series of adverts playing on their slogan of the best a man can get, to have adverts in which men were bullying and leching at women and doing various things. And the advert effectively told them, you have to change, be the best you can be, don't be toxic men, be new men, be all touchy-feely, trendy, kind, diverse. We see adverts for coffee involving, on British TV adverts, involving transgender people. And there's the one where the actor in the advert is being referred to by, if I remember rightly, it's someone who's gone from female to transgender to being male. So there's various relatives and so on referring them to that person by their female birth name. And then they go into the coffee shop and they order their coffee, and they order it under their male name. And the barista says, I think it's James, I think the name is, if I remember right. Says, your coffee's ready, and there's a big smile on the customer's face to say, look, this coffee has validated my identity. Is that just a coffee company being trendy, or are they engaged in a very positive, supportive approach to transgender people? Are they exploiting transgender people in order to flog coffee? Because let's face it, buying a cup of coffee isn't going to, change the world in any way for people, whether you're transgender or what on earth you might be. It's not going to be a big change there. So is this bandwagoning? Is it exploitation? Is it admirable social equality and commitment? How do we understand what's going on here? And this would be a room for discussion, exploration of these ideas, how they all interrelate, what you feel about them, and we can use the chat facility or similar facilities for you to discuss these ideas with each other as well as with me. Be interesting to see what you think. Which is something you could consider if you want to pause the video, have a coffee, and reflect on this from your own point of view, and maybe have a chat about it with other students in the class through social media. Either in your current business or if you have plans for the future that you'd like to move into business-wise. Do your business plans, present or future, involve any sort of social agenda? Now, whether that is, I'm hesitating to use the word old-fashioned, a more traditional social agenda, or whether it's a more radical, liberal social agenda. That could be in terms of who you recruit. It could be in terms of who you market to. It could be in terms of product design. It could be in terms of a whole raft of things. Would you be just saying, oh, well, this is let's say a more traditional one, I want a company, and I think most of my customers for this product will be female, and therefore I will mostly employ women to front the product, sell it, market it at women, advertise it towards them? Or do you want to challenge that? So there is a cosmetics advert on TV at the moment in which not only do they have the usual glamorous looking models, female models, putting the makeup on, they have at least one male model who is putting on his makeup, and in other words, somebody you would not normally see in a cosmetics advert, unless you wouldn't have normally seen somebody like that in a cosmetics advert, breaking the gender norms, say 10 years ago. So it's making a decision is it to broaden their customer base, to say that men might want to buy makeup, this type of makeup, as well as women? Or is it just sort of a little bit of attention seeking to see if they can gain more focus amongst customers who go, oh, look, there's a man in that advert, oh, shock, horror, gasp, and see if they can get a reaction that will boost their profile? Is it to try and come across as a more gender-neutral firm in terms of how they recruit staff, to say we want men working for us as much as women working for us and selling our products and so on? What's going on there? How would you, in your current or future business plans, factor in social agendas? Would you factor it in at all? Do you think it's a total irrelevancy? Or would that form part and parcel of your business plan? Something to pause, have a coffee, think about, perhaps chat with the others through whatever social media methods you want to use to chat with them. I'm sure there might be a few entertaining answers going on to this question. How do we understand niche markets? Trey Bodge, who is not the lady in the photograph, that's just some random photograph I nicked off the internet from a cosmetics company, but Trey Bodge, unfortunate surname there, started her company called 3 Custom Colour Specialists, which is back to American companies again. Started that back in the 90s. Sticking with this cosmetics theme, saying that the majority of cosmetics that were being marketed in the 90s were marketed to white customers, and so the colour range in the face powders and what have you, lipsticks, all that sort of palaver, were marketed to people with white skin tones, not for women with black skin tones or kind of Asian skin tones, East Asian skin tones, that sort of thing. And so she wanted to develop a range of products that would market to women from various different ethnic backgrounds and their skin tones. But there weren't as many in America, as many customers from those ethnic communities as there were from the white community. So there were a lot more white customers than black or Asian or what have you customers. And so she was looking at more of a niche market in terms of fewer people to sell to in the first place. And of course, not every woman wants to buy cosmetics anyway, no matter what her ethnicity is. So it's not as if every single black woman or every single Asian woman would be rushing out to buy cosmetics. A fair number of them perhaps don't want to use cosmetics at all, just as a fair number of white women don't want to use cosmetics at all. So we are talking about a noticeably smaller market in terms of number of potential customers. So she flagged up that yes, she was perfectly aware that she was selling to a smaller customer base, and so producing the goods, producing the cosmetics was perhaps a little bit more expensive because it involved a different array of chemicals and substances going into the cosmetics. So not as many people to sell it to, as many women to sell it to, so her turnover would not be as high as if she had marketed to a white customer base, which was much larger. Prices therefore would go up a bit. In terms of production. Should that reflect in the price tag charged to the customer? So in effect, would this company be saying, or any similar company anywhere else in the world, would they effectively be saying, well, it costs us more to make cosmetics for black women, therefore we're going to have to hike the price. Therefore, a white woman could go and buy this type of blusher, whatever it might be, for, I don't know, £2.50, random sum of money there, whereas the same kind of blusher with the somewhat more expensive ingredients and so forth, smaller market range, we're going to have to charge £4.50 for that. So two people, a black woman and a white woman, effectively buying the same kind of a product, blusher is blusher, but because it's made differently, a smaller customer base, the black woman would have to pay more for it. Is that ethical? Is it unethical? Is it exploiting a minority group? Or is it simply the reality of business to say, well, there are not as many customers for this, so I'm going to have to charge more for it, and the production costs are higher, so I'm going to have to charge more because of that reason as well. How do we understand? Should the retailer, Trey Bodge in this case, take a bit of a loss and say, no, I'm going to market it at approximately the same price that a white woman would be paying for her cheaper to manufacture goods, because I don't want my customer base to feel they're being unfairly charged or unfairly stigmatized, even though in reality it does actually cost more to make this product. But I will take the price loss, the profit loss on the chin, in order to keep my customers happy, so that none of them feel that they are being unfairly targeted. What should Bodge have done? That's the quote there from Bodge herself. A fair-skinned woman may have 8 different tones on her face, whereas a dark-skinned woman may have 25 different tones on her face, so it becomes very hard to cater to a dark-skinned client. So many brands don't have darker skin colours because it's very difficult to have a range of colour for those women. It's difficult from a business perspective to have so many shades available, but we made it a priority. So she's trying to provide this more expensive range of goods to her customers. What should she have done? What would you do if you were Trey Bodge? Or indeed you were making any kind of, not just cosmetics, anything, any sort of goods which you knew were targeted at a specific smaller market than a comparable range of goods that's targeted at a much larger consumer market. Such as, well, perhaps let's say some article that is designed to be of aid to a disabled person, which has to be made in a different way than the same kind of article made for an able-bodied person because it needs to be manufactured differently for some reason or another. Should the price go up, and you're effectively saying, well, if a disabled person wants to use the same kind of item as an able-bodied person, then they simply have to pay more for it because it costs more to make it. And there's not as many disabled people in the world as there are able-bodied people, so there's fewer people to sell it to anyway, and therefore I'm not going to make as much profit unless I, as the manufacturer, hike my profit range. What do you do? What would you do? Here is a cause for discussion. The living wage is another issue to move on to. So 2015 research there from Citizens UK, they found out that back in 2015, is it going to be significantly different in 2020? Well, we are in this weird situation economically of so many businesses being shut now, so it's a bit differently. Maybe we should talk in terms of 2019 rather than 2020 at this juncture. So many people were so badly paid that their wages were having to be topped up by benefits, government benefits, state benefits, which ultimately, of course, is taxpayer money, to the tune of 11 billion a year. It's the same in other countries. Not all countries, but quite a lot of countries. And some employers are notorious for paying their staff so little that even if they work full time, they still can't effectively pay their rent and put food on the table and pay their bills, so that government has to step in to provide benefits to enable people to still keep working. So the working poor, in other words, and the companies involved make, in some cases, I'm thinking of a particular American-based multinational company that owns a lot of supermarkets here, makes gargantuan profits for the family that runs it, but pays so little to certainly the American-based employees that the vast majority of them are on benefits as well. So in other words, the taxpayer is having to subsidise the gargantuan profits of the company, of the family that own the business. Is that ethical? Is it sane? Is it sensible? Should American politicians get their finger out and deal with this issue instead of just taking donations and support from said company? Therein is a question. The big four supermarkets you've got there, Tesco, Asda, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, again this is 2015, I don't know if it's still the same, some of money today, were costing almost $1 billion a year in tax credits and benefits to their staff, so that they're, again, the working poor. Why should taxpayers bung £1 billion at these companies who are not short of cash at all, let's face it, in order for them to go on paying minimum wage? Should they not be made to pay a living wage rather than a minimum wage? The argument there from Medway: if supermarkets and other low-paying employers know they can secure work even at derisory wages, since pay will be topped up by the state, they have no incentive to offer higher wages. So is that an argument for the state to turn around and say, henceforth from now we will not be topping up? What is the end result of that? No benefits available to the working poor? Well, the working poor in the short term suffer massively, and some of them will have to stop working and either go and get much better paid jobs somewhere else if they can find them. But then let's face it, if they could do that, they probably would have already done it. Or they will have to go completely onto state benefits and become unemployed, which is not good for them, it's not good for the state and the taxpayer. But equally, of course, it would then mean that a lot of these companies would suddenly lose a lot of their employees. Would they go on being able to function as companies if suddenly they've lost 10%, 20%, however much, of their employees who just can't afford to work for them anymore? Would those companies then be forced in the medium to long term to start hiking the amount they pay in wages, or maybe lessening the gargantuan profits they turn over every single year, in order to draw back members of staff who would then be able to afford to work for them for a living wage rather than for a taxpayer's subsidised wage? Is the problem here entirely the companies? Is there also an element of problem here where maybe the amount of rent being charged by landlords is so extortionately high that wages don't keep up with it? or whether the bills, the amount charged by electric companies, gas companies, phone companies, the rest of it, is so high that people can't afford to pay their bills. So is it maybe that caps need to be brought in for landlords and for supply companies, electric companies, gas companies, the rest of it? Quite how should the government be tackling these issues? Therein is a topic for debate, and some of you may have direct experience of this, either in your current or previous employment. Some of you might have had to be in the working poor position of having an income and still having to claim benefits because your income was just so dismally low. So you might have very direct experience of this. That then brings us on to the productivity puzzle, as it's referred to, which has been noticed in Britain and a number of other companies by economists, not companies, countries, sorry, by economists. Though different economists have different arguments as to the whys and wherefores of the productivity problem puzzle. British workers now produce less per hour per worker than before the austerity crisis. So compare before austerity to post-austerity. Theoretically, we are post-austerity, although with the current corona crisis, we might not be quite as post as we thought we were. It's going to pan out in various different gruesome ways over the next few years, economically. Why has production per hour per worker gone down? Different people have different opinions on this. So Martin and Rowthorne's opinion is that labour hoarding is a function. What is labour hoarding? It's when a company keeps on retained staff which under other circumstances they might have got shot of. If you get shot of your staff, wage bills goes up, all sorts of bills goes up. You've got to recruit new workers to replace them, maybe more effective, more efficient workers. But then if you want more efficient workers, you're probably going to have to pay more. Why would an efficient worker who can claim a high wage from one company go and work for a low wage from another company? So are they paying lower wages to inefficient staff because they don't want to pay higher wages to more efficient staff? Is that what's going on? And maybe they were looking ahead, at least they were in 2012 when Martin and Rowthorne put their idea out there. Were they looking ahead to think, well, we'll get through this recession, then there'll be an economic boom, and then we'll need lots of staff, so we'll keep hold of the less efficient staff we've got at the moment because we'll need them in the future when we get to this economic boom. Still waiting for that one. And then we don't have to start spending money recruiting new staff, training up brand new staff. We'll already have a workforce who are trained, who know how to do the job, and then we can just get them to do it more effectively by various incentives once we're into a boom rather than into a bust. If they also hold on to their staff, then that means those staff are not then being hired by competitors. So is this a ploy, Martin and Rowthorne argue, to kind of undermine competitors not only by keeping hold of maybe their less efficient staff, but also keeping hold of their very skilled staff, because they don't want those skilled staff going elsewhere and putting their services towards the profit of some rival company. Is that part of the issue? When high-skilled staff leave, they take things with them. So this is an experience some of you might have had, where perhaps you've left one company, gone to another. Have you taken things with you? You take your skills with you, your knowledge, your expertise, obviously, but maybe you took customers with you, depending on the nature of the job, of course. That people who trusted you so much to do their job, it was you they trusted rather than the company itself. So when you walk and you go to a different company, your customers walk with you, because it's not the company they want quite as much as it is your expertise, your efficiency. And I've seen this actually happening in quite small scale ways, not just people, engineers and people like that with very high skill jobs, but even something like a waiter or waitress who is very popular, and they go to work leave a job in one restaurant and go to another. And some customers at least, I've seen going to the new restaurant because they really like that that waiter or waitress. They know they're friendly, they're good at their job, and so on. There's a bit of a kind of a banter going on with them, and so they go to that new place because that's what they like, the customer service, even more than they like the food. And likewise, if a chef leaves, I've known people to follow a chef to the new restaurant that they're employed in because on that occasion it's the food they like more than the customer service. And so they'll go there as well. So not only do you take your expertise, but also your, what you might term insider knowledge. You might be aware of future plans of company A, and when you go and move and work to company B, you might take the knowledge with them and perhaps tell company B what you know about company A and their plans for the future. So there can be an anxiety about losing very specialist, very qualified, very useful staff because of what they take with them. It's not just the staff member staff you might be losing customers as well. Is it ethical? Is it not? Whether it's ethical or not, it's what happens in practice. Should you be able to lure customers away, to effectively pick up a phone and say, look, I'm changing job next month, I'm ditching this company and I'm going to work for that company. If you would like to come and work with me, to bring your business with me to the new company, because I've been such a good, provided such good customer service, blah, 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 why don't you come with me? Should that be illegal or discouraged in some other way? Or is it simply reality? That's how work goes. And sometimes it's the employees who are in a position of power more so than it is the employers on certain occasions. It'd be interesting to hear if any of you have been in a position of doing that at some point in the past, or have worked for companies where some other member of staff did that. They walked out and took a lot of customers with them when they walked out. Has that happened? Pause to think about ethical dilemmas in the workplace of a broader nature, of a wider nature here. We get on to Hanson's 6 dilemmas. Now, Hanson says these factors are things that all sorts of people in all sorts of jobs have to think about. It's not just the kinds of jobs we've been talking about so far. And so that first one there, deciding what a worthwhile job to do is, that's not only for employees, but teenagers who are doing their exams and whatnot and thinking about their future, who haven't got a job yet, but they're thinking about future jobs. It applies to them too. What do you want to spend, if not your whole life, at least the next few years doing? Just making money? Even if you're bored to death in the job, even if it seems like a pointless job or an immoral job, as long as it pays the money, you'll take the cash and run. Is that what you want? Or do you want to feel that you're doing something useful? Obviously, there's huge focus at the moment on things like NHS staff, doctors, nurses, porters, what have you, who can all say to themselves that they are bringing great benefit to other people, to the sick, the injured. They're doing great things to help those people. They are doing morally worthwhile jobs. Is every job morally worthwhile? Well, some might clearly be very unethical, but you're also going to have a lot of jobs that are kind of morally indifferent. They're neither good nor bad, they're just there. Do you want to have a job that's just there? Or do you want to feel you're actively doing something good? Is that something good for the wider community, for your customers, for the world at large? Good for yourself, combination of all of that. Are we thinking, and certainly Hanson says we ought to be, thinking more and more about the work-life balance? Once upon a time you just worked till you dropped. These days we have leisure time. It's a phenomenon not enjoyed by people in the 18th century very much. I guess they were very well off. But nowadays almost everyone has the possibility of leisure time in this country, family time and so on. Do you want to be working every minute of every day? Never seeing your family, never seeing your friends, never getting a day off, and even, let's say, even if you do get a day off, being so exhausted by the time you get to your day off that you're fit for nothing. You just lie there in a heap. Is that a worthwhile job, a worthwhile way of spending your life? Slogging your guts out at work and then collapsing into a heap, incapable of anything else? Do you want to have the sort of life where you've got the time, the energy, the money for hobbies, for family, for friends, for holidays, for doing nice things? Or do you want to have the kind of job where you work like a navvy for, let's say, 11 months of the year in order to enjoy a couple of weeks' holiday? Is that worthwhile? Or do you want your leisure time, family time on a weekly basis, every weekend, every evening, every day? Do you want to be going home, so you worked all day, then go home and have to work all evening unpaid? Marking essays, for example, or doing whatever it is that you might be doing of an evening. Or would you prefer more work-life balance? And that's not what's that can be phrased as an ethical dilemma. It's also obviously a quality of life issue. Do you want to join corporate culture, wear a uniform, be a sort of faceless minion in the crowd, obeying whatever the policies are of your CEO? Or do you want to stand out, be colourful, unusual, distinct, and individual? I am not a number. Do you want to be an individual, and whether that's by running your own business, being self-employed, or whether that is by getting into the kind of employment where you might be rewarded for standing out and being distinct, like, let's say, the acting profession or the music industry, something like that, where being noticeable is of more reward than being kind of blending into the crowd and just fading into the magnolia wallpaper. What about if you're ever in a job where you've got a manager, a boss, who is either useless or completely nasty and unpleasant and immoral and trying to get you to do dodgy, unethical things? Do you stand up to such a person and perhaps risk getting sacked if they're corrupt and unethical, or if they're weak and useless? Do you effectively end up doing their job for them, unpaid, as well as doing your own job? Or do you stand out and say to somebody higher up the organisation, this manager is crap, they're no good at their job, I'm fed up trying to cover up for them, get shot of them, get somebody better, and that might not make you terribly popular in the organisation in the long run? Or if they're a corrupt manager, do you whistle-blow on them, stand out against them, again, perhaps risk losing your job in the process? Or do you just shut up, put up, knuckle down, get on with it for the sake of a wage packet? What do you do? Likewise, if you're in a workplace, you think, oh, this could be done more efficiently if we did X, Y, and Z. Do you put your hand up and say, excuse me, and make your suggestions to the manager, which could be accepted and you get a pat on the back, or they could just look at you and think, oh, shut up. But by making it more efficient, you stand out. We're back to that again. By making suggestions, do you come across as a smart aleck, a bit of a know-all who's not very popular? Or do you come across as a useful person worth having on board, maybe worth promoting to a better position? Or just keep your gob shut and think, well, if this is the way they want to run it, fair enough, get on with it. I could do it better, but then I'm not the one making the profits here. I'll just coast along, do what I'm told to do, not make waves. And back to ethical issues again, the good of society versus the good of your company. Let's say you work for a company which causes a lot of industrial pollution. Do you go on working for them, or do you think, yes, I'm making a nice wage here, but I'm also ruining the world in the process, and therefore I want to get out of this company, work for a better company, possibly at a lower wage? And is that where you leave it, just change jobs? Or do you put the boot in before you leave? Do you, in effect, say, whether to government, to newspapers, to the manager of a company, whoever the relevant person is to say it to, look, I am leaving this company because you cause so much pollution. You need to do something about that. Or you go to the newspapers, you go to write a letter to your local MP or someone or another and say, I am leaving this company because of their horrendous work practices. Whether that's pollution or maltreatment of staff or ripping off customers by selling faulty products, whatever the dilemma might be, where yes, you are making a nice wage packet, but you are very conscious that that wage packet is bought at a considerable cost to wider society. What do you do? And Hansen, well, explores the arguments, but ultimately leaves people to make their own decision, as indeed I am going to be leaving you to make your own decisions about those sorts of issues and what you do under any given one of those circumstances. So here's a few theoretical situations, moving from real-world situations to theoretical ones, which, again, if we were in class, we could have a bit of discussion and banter going about these, but something for you to reflect on and maybe discuss through the various forms of social media. So one, you are a manager and you know that the company is secretly planning in several months' time to shut down a branch where your friend works. You've got a good friend, close friend who works at another branch. You find out, your friend doesn't know, that the place she works at is going to be shut down and she'll probably end up out of a job. But she tells you, you're out one evening, you're having a drink, whatever, maybe phoning each other, doing something or another, and she says she's thinking of taking out a big loan. And you're sitting there thinking, oh God, don't, because you know perfectly well she's not likely to be earning any money in the near future to pay that loan back. So do you keep your gob shut because you're a manager, you're not meant to have these release these secrets yet, you're under strict orders not to tell anyone else in the company what's going to happen just yet? So do you keep your trap shut and let your friend take out a big loan which she can then not pay back and is going to be in financial dire circumstances when her branch is shut down? Or do you give a nod and a wink and a hint that she really shouldn't be taking out this loan? And obviously then in your situation, once you've told her, there's no guarantee she won't tell someone else who'll tell someone else who'll tell someone else. And then all of a sudden what's meant to be a secret is known by everyone. What do you do? Keep quiet or drop the hint? What about the situation where you've got a previously industrious employee, Tom, who has turned into this simmering ball of rage and resentment and sullenness and passive aggression as he makes minimal effort and stomps around the shop or office or factory, whatever it is, with a face on him like the back end of a bus, because his supervisor, Jane, took the credit for something he did. He came up with an idea he came up with. So he's been ripped off by Jane. He feels very resentful. He can't stick Jane, and he's taking out his resentment of Jane on the whole company. You know that Jane is very pushy, very ambitious, good supervisor, even if clearly she's not terribly ethical when it comes to plagiarism and taking the credit for other people's work. So you're in a bit of a dilemma as the manager here. If you penalise Jane, she's very good at her, mostly very good at her job, so that could have a bad effect on Jane. If you penalise Tom, he's going to get even more resentful, even more inefficient, and won't be there in the future bringing out any more good ideas. How do you resolve this tension between Jane and Tom? What do you do? Mull over, think about, let me know. And now, next lecture is not next week, because next week is the Easter holidays. Woohoo! Time to overdose on chocolate. So when we reconvene after the Easter holidays, I don't know at this stage, nobody knows at this stage, whether after the Easter holidays we'll all be back in class having normal lectures, or whether we'll still be doing these virtual lectures and still on shutdown. We don't know. So either the next lecture will be in person or it will be a recorded one. So I'm simply unable to tell you what's going to happen at this juncture. But whichever way it happens, we'll get on to the topic of monopolies and the ethics and laws and rules and regulations around business monopolies, and monopsonies, which, if you're unfamiliar with the term, is essentially a one-horse town when it comes to an employer. So a village, a town, as potentially even a city, in which virtually everyone in that community works for one company or is directly dependent upon the success of one company. And we'll look at some of the dilemmas that arise in conjunction with monopolies and monopsonies. So I'll leave that there for now. I'll email you about setting up one of these chat room discussions should any of you want to talk about your assignments or want to talk about the topics in the class. Then we can discuss them as a class online. Okay, take care.